Hello, my name is Elaine and welcome to Latin America 101, the place where we're going to be shedding a light on Latin American affairs. So in this very first episode, we're going to head over to Brazil and we're going to look at socio-economic policies in connection to Lula and the Novo Bolsa Família. And we're going to ask ourselves, what's the future of socio-economic policies in the country? And to answer these questions, we're going to head back to 2003 and look at the policies that were adopted under Lula's first presidential term. Then we're going to move on to look at what happened or what changed under the government of Jair Bolsonaro. And we're going to finish by returning to the future and looking at what Lula is doing in terms of socio-economic policies. So stay tuned to learn a bit more about these policy elements in Brazil. On the 2nd of March 2023, Lula, the new president of Brazil, declared the return of Bolsa Família. Bolsa Família was originally a socio-economic policy that Lula adopted back in 2003 under his first presidential mandate. What was the goal of this policy and what did it achieve? The goal of this policy was to eradicate social inequalities and poverty throughout the country, and in doing so, it had the objective of increasing school attendance amongst children, improving prenatal healthcare for not only women but also the babies, and also improving vaccinations and the take-up of vaccinations throughout the country. In Lula's new declaration, he declared that eligible families will receive 600 Brazilian reais every month for the families, in addition to 150 Brazilian reais for per child they have under the age of 6. This is an attempt to combat against social inequalities and poverty throughout the country. Let's take a deeper look at the policy, and we'll do that by looking at what happened back in 2003 at the beginning of implementing poverty eradication policies in Brazil. As stated, Bolsa Família was a policy adopted in 2003 to eradicate poverty and social inequalities throughout the country. The policy had many different areas of implementations, and one specific area was that of eradicating hunger, Fome Zero. And as part of this, in 2016, the World Food Programme, a part of the United Nations, announced Lula as a global leader, as a global champion in the battle against hunger. Hence, the work of Bolsa Família was very much acknowledged around the world. So let's take a deeper look at how exactly the policy worked. So how exactly did the policy work and how was it implemented? So the Bolsa Família policy was based upon conditional income transfer program. So what exactly does that mean? It basically means that there were conditions in place in order for the government to release or to send money to the families. For example, families had to ensure that their children attended school, and they had to have a specific or a minimum attendance percentage. And on the other side, it also ensured that families vaccinated their children. For example, families were obligated to ensure that the children had specific vaccinations. And it can also be seen in prenatal care. For example, mothers they had the obligation to go and see the doctor to have their regular prenatal checkups to see how themselves and the babies were doing. So this is how the policy basically worked. There was a set of obligations families had to undertake these. There were obligations that would improve the health of the families, but also their socio-economic context. And as a result of obliging these and accomplishing these elements, the governments would release money to the families. The Bolsa Família program was very successful in Brazil. For example, the policy decreased poverty levels throughout the country. By 2017, there were 15% less people living in poverty, and there was a decrease of 25% of those living in extreme poverty. And in addition to this, the policy had helped to increase the school attendance levels of students. For example, by 2017, 95.4% of those between the ages of 6 and 15, and 92.7% of those between the ages of 16 and 17 had school attendance levels way above the minimum national requirements. So the policy was extremely efficient and effective when it came to decreasing poverty and attending and increasing the school attendance levels throughout the country. But why was this policy so successful? How was it able to target those living in extreme poverty? Well, one of the main reasons for this was the fact that 70% of the financial budgets dedicated to the Bolsa Família program was invested into those living in extreme poverty, and particularly those living, the 20% of those living in the highest levels of poverty within the country. And that's one of the reasons why the program was so successful. Although the policy had drastically decreased poverty levels throughout the country, did you know that the total budget spending of this policy was only 0.5% of Brazil's GDP? And this is very impressive considering the implications and the effectiveness of the policy. After having looked at socio-economic policies under the presidency of Lula, we're now going to move on and look a bit at the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro, and we're going to specifically look at his policy of Auxílio Brasil. Jair Bolsonaro has always been a fierce critic of Bolsa Família, the policy created by Lula. He's argued that it basically increased levels of criminality within the country and that it also encourages higher levels of unemployability, as in his words, people think that, okay, the government will give me money, so I no longer need to work. This, of course, is not true. There has been no evidence at all to support this whatsoever. However, these are the views that he has portrayed. And as a result of this, he ended the Bolsa Família program in October 2021. You might ask, what happened next? Well, it's an interesting story, and it's probably very linked to the presidential elections that were held in Brazil in October 2022. After having criticized Bolsa Família for years for handing money out to poor families in Brazil, how did Bolsonaro react and what did he do? Well, he decided to create a new socio-economic program called Auxílio Brasil. So what's the main difference between this and Bolsa Família? Well, both programs were more or less exactly the same, except for the fact that Auxílio Brasil, instead of giving 400 Brazilian reais to families per month, as Bolsa Família did, it increased the cash payments to 600 Brazilian reais per month. And why did this happen? So on one hand, it may be due to the ongoing pandemic that the world was living in back in 2021, and Brazil was, of course, very much affected. However, a lot of people suggest that it has a more strategic reason to it, so to speak, seeing that the presidential elections in Brazil were then taking place in October 2022. And not only that, but Bolsa Família has always been strongly connected with Lula and the Workers' Party, up to the point where Bolsonaro accused the Workers' Party, the PT party, of creating this policy just to win election votes. However, there's no correlation between this because a lot of the poor areas and poor families in poorer areas that had received Bolsa Família before they did vote for extreme right-wing parties such as Jair Bolsonaro, so to speak. So that accusation is not true. However, Jair Bolsonaro decided to create a new socio-economic program that a lot of people have dubbed it as being an electoral tool. And what's interesting to note is that the first payment of this program was made on the 9th of August 2022, just 2 months before the presidential elections, where Jair Bolsonaro went head-to-head against Lula. So, as I said, a lot of people do really believe that the Auxílio Brasil was an electoral tool for Bolsonaro. In this next part, we're going to fast forward back to today, and we're going to look at the Novo Bolsa Família. So we're going to look at the new socio-economic program proposed by Lula and see what are the challenges that this program will face in its implementation plan. So what can we expect to see with the new Bolsa Família? So the first thing is the fact that each eligible family will receive 600 Brazilian reais each month, and each family will be eligible to have an additional 150 Brazilian reais for each child they have under the age of 6. In addition to this, there will be an additional 50 Brazilian reais each month for each young person between the ages of 7 and 18 years old, and pregnant women will also receive an additional 50 Brazilian reais each month. So how exactly will this work? Well, there is a problem to a certain extent. The first payments are expected to be seen on the 20th of March. However, the long-term implementation of the project is somewhat questionable, as the Congress will need to approve this within 120 days since the beginning of the 2nd of March. At the moment, the new Bolsa Família plan has been implemented as a result of the provisional measure that the president can roll out, una medida provisoria. However, we will have to see what will happen in the coming months. So let's take a deeper look at the exact challenges that will be facing Lula and the new Bolsa Família program. The biggest challenge for Lula and the new Bolsa Família plan is getting approval from Congress. So in the next 120 days, or in 120 days after the March 2nd, Lula needs to have the approval of Congress. However, this is a big problem. First of all, the Workers' Party, they only have 9 out of the 81 seats in the Congress. And if we look at the coalition that they have formed with other similar party groups, they only have a total of 32 seats. So a lot of work will have to be done in order to persuade the independent congresswomen and congressmen to vote for this new law, and also a lot of work to do with the opposition members to ensure that they also vote in favour of it. Whether this happens or not, it's a very, very big question. And not only is this important for the Bolsa Família program, but it is also extremely important for the future of socio-economic policies in Brazil. Without the Congress's approval within the next 120 days or so, the future of socio-economic policies in Brazil is in danger. It is very questionable what will happen in the future and how will these families survive within the coming months and the coming year. So it is vital that Lula and his congressmen and women are able to negotiate and create a front with other independents and members of the opposition to pass this bill. If you enjoyed my video on Lula and Bolsa Família and socio-economic policies in Brazil, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn a bit more about Latin America, and feel free to drop in a comment if you'd like me to do a video covering any specific region or events taking place in Latin America. So don't forget to subscribe to Latin America 101.